Donald Trump's hypocrisy is on full display. He has slapped tariffs on India even as he himself chases energy deals with Russia. A new report spills the beans on how the US is in discussions with Russia for energy deals and more. We'll bring you all the details. Meanwhile, the US president is taking aim at the Fed too. He wants to fire a governor of the American Central Bank. We'll tell you what that means for the global economy. And in a move that raises eyebrows, Trump wants a stake in US defense companies. His Commerce Secretary has called them an extension of the US government. Also in focus, the making of another conflict. What are American warships doing in Venezuelan waters? How floods have ravaged northern India. Why Tokyo's Africa ambitions have sparked furor in Japan. How shops and restaurants in India will be barred from asking for your mobile number for billing. Why the parents of a teenager in the US have sued OpenAI for his suicide. And why Botswana in Africa has declared a public health emergency. All this and more coming up. The headlines first. Russia opposes European countries sending peacekeeping troops to Ukraine, also rules out any meeting between the two presidents in the near future. Kiev is pushing for Western-backed security guarantees as part of any agreement with Moscow, while Russia wants Ukraine to cede more territory in the east. Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu recognizes the Armenian genocide. It's the first time that Israel has done so. Netanyahu acknowledged the mass killings carried out by the Ottoman Empire during the First World War. Turkey has condemned Netanyahu's remarks, claiming it a bid to cover up the bloodshed in Gaza. Taiwan indicts 3 people for allegedly stealing trade secrets from TSMC to help a Japanese company. They have been charged under the National Security Act and the Trade Secrets Act. TSMC is the world's biggest maker of semiconductor chips. Its clients include Nvidia and Apple. French President Emmanuel Macron backs his embattled Prime Minister, who has called a confidence vote next month. It could lead to the collapse of his government. Opposition parties have urged the president to hold new parliamentary elections. Macron took office in 2017. Since then, France has had 6 prime ministers. And in a tit-for-tat move, junta-run Niger restricts visa delivery for Europeans, citing difficulties its citizens face in obtaining visas from European embassies. Since taking power in a coup in 2023, Niger's military-run government has turned its back on the West and favored boosting ties with Russia. Donald Trump has pulled the trigger. 50% tariffs on India are now in force. They came into effect this morning. India is only the second country after Brazil to face such a high levy. Some observers had hoped that better sense would prevail and that Trump would eventually change his mind, but that has not happened. He has not softened his position or his tone. Listen to what the US president said last evening.
Just like India and Pakistan, we're going to end up in a nuclear war if I didn't stop them. You know, it's sort of strange. I saw they were fighting. Then I saw 7 jets were shot down. I said, that's not good. That's a lot of jets, you know. $150 million planes were shot down. A lot of them. 7, maybe more than that. They didn't even report the real number. And I'm talking to a very terrific man, Modi of India. And I say, what's going on with you in Pakistan? Then I'm talking to Pakistan on trade. I said, what's going on with you in India? And the hatred was tremendous. Now, this has been going on for a hell of a long time, like sometimes with different names for hundreds of years. But I said, what's going on? I said, I don't want to make a trade deal. No, we want to make a trade deal. I said, no, I don't want to make a trade deal with you.
So first, Trump called the Indian Prime Minister a terrific man. Then he claimed that India and Pakistan were on the verge of a nuclear clash. He said they've been fighting for hundreds of years. Again, factually incorrect. And then he implied that he was personally speaking to Prime Minister Modi. Now, Trump keeps telling these stories on repeat and New Delhi keeps fact-checking him. So let's set the record straight once again. India and Pakistan were not on the verge of a nuclear war. Donald Trump had no role in forging a ceasefire, and trade was never a factor. The 50% tariffs on India prove the point. So this is simply a case of Trump wanting credit. He wants to announce deals and claim victory. But when India called out his levies, refused to give him credit for the ceasefire, and rejected his one-sided deal, Trump raised the tariffs. and he blamed it on New Delhi's purchase of Russian oil. Unfortunately for him, a new report is now out and it exposes Trump's hypocrisy. The US president is doing the exact same thing for which he is targeting India. The US is discussing energy deals with Russia. Officials from both sides have met at least twice. The first discussion took place earlier this month when Trump's envoy Steve Witkoff visited Moscow. He met President Vladimir Putin. He also met Kirill Dmitriev, who is the Kremlin's investment envoy. And then they met again at the Alaska summit on the 15th of August. On both occasions, the agenda was Ukraine. The focus was supposed to be on ending the war in Ukraine and what Russia needs to cease hostilities. But the Americans also wanted to strike energy deals. That's what the report says, that the White House wanted a headline, a big investment announcement, a symbolic win. It quoted one source as saying, this is how Trump feels like he's achieved something. And which deals were on the table? Well, one proposal was for ExxonMobil, the American energy giant. They wish to re-enter Russia's Sakhalin-1 oil project. The second proposal was for equipment. Russia could purchase American equipment for its LNG plants. That's the idea that Trump officials pitched to the Russians, even though sanctions prohibit such deals. They're talking about it. And that's not all. Proposals for the US to buy Russian icebreaker vessels were also discussed. Again, remember, all of this happened as Trump and his team continued to target India for doing business with Moscow. Like I said, the hypocrisy is unbelievable. On one hand, Donald Trump tariffs India for doing business with Moscow. On the other, he pitches similar deals to Russia, even offers American equipment to Moscow. It proves what we've been saying all along, that Trump uses tariffs and sanctions as weapons of pressure. This is not about policy. It's not about consistency. The goal here is simple. Grab the headline, steal the spotlight. But for now, Trump is not getting much of either. The tariffs on India are in force, but the markets are shut for a public holiday today, so the real impact is yet to show. Although the markets did crash yesterday, investors lost more than $60 billion in a day. In the days ahead, we may see more losses and disruption, but India is not ready to submit to Trump's conditions. New Delhi is open to talks, but a trade deal is unlikely anytime soon. As for Moscow, Trump met Putin on the 15th of August. 12 days have passed. In that time, Trump has met Zelensky. He's spoken to every major European capital. And still, the war in Ukraine grinds on. No peace deal, no energy deal with Russia. Trump may call this deal making, but it looks nothing more than showmanship. So the fight on the trade front is escalating. In the meantime, Trump has opened another front. He's going after the US Federal Reserve. That's the American central bank. It's been on the US president's target for months, and now Trump is piling on the pressure. He has fired a Fed governor. Her name is Lisa Cook. She's the first black woman to serve on the post. And what do Fed governors do? Well, they're among America's most powerful officials when it comes to the economy. They sit on the Fed's board of governors. This is the body that runs the Federal Reserve. There are 7 governors in all. They oversee America's banking system. They decide the interest rates. They supervise the US dollar. These governors are appointed by the US president, but it's the US Senate that confirms them. And each one of them serves for a term of 14 years. This long tenure is designed to keep them independent and free from political pressure. So Lisa Cook was appointed in 2022. Technically, she can hold the post till 2038. But Trump is determined to remove her. He announced the sacking on Truth Social. He has accused her of mortgage fraud and said that she should be removed. But Lisa Cook says she's not going anywhere. She's preparing to file a lawsuit to keep her job. And that means Trump's decision will go to court. It could turn into a long legal battle, one that central bankers around the world will watch closely. In fact, they're already worried about the Fed's independence, and this fight between Trump and a governor will only feed into those fears. This standoff could have a direct impact both on the US economy and the world economy. For over a century, the Fed has operated largely free from political control. Its job is to keep prices stable and support growth. But Trump is tearing down that wall. Economists say if Trump succeeds, it will be the biggest threat to the Fed's independence. And history shows that when politicians control interest rates, the result is chaos. Look at what happened to Turkey. President Erdogan forced his central bank to cut rates. It led to runaway inflation and a collapsing currency. The US could face similar challenges, and we'll explain how. Broadly, there are three scenarios, 3 points of concern. First is a weak dollar. The US dollar, or the greenback as it's called, is the world's reserve currency. More than 50% of global reserves that are held by central banks across the world are in the US dollar, more than 50%. And according to experts, that is unlikely to change at least for the next decade. But in order to trust the dollar, central bankers need to trust the Fed. And that trust is what has been shaken. As of June this year, the US currency has slid by 10%. A weak dollar hurts a lot of people. It hurts Americans who travel. It makes imports more expensive. And it creates turbulence in every country whose currency is pegged to the dollar. So Trump's latest moves put the dollar at risk. The second point to focus on is borrowing costs. The US government raises money from investors in the form of bonds. And for this, the government pays them an interest. Now, if investors lose faith in the Fed, they will demand higher interest for government bonds. They will demand higher returns to lend money to the US. In other words, higher interest on government bonds. That means higher costs for the government, companies, and consumers. In fact, the bond market is already flashing warning signs. Long-term US government bonds are losing value, which shows that investors are already feeling uneasy about Trump's decisions. Concern number 3 is inflation. If the Fed bends to Trump's will, if it cuts interest rates drastically, it could trigger high inflation in the United States. Remember, Trump's economic policies are already causing stress. Electricity prices are rising twice as fast as inflation. Forecasts say that they will go even higher, all thanks to the US president's policies. So long story short, Trump's move against Lisa Cook is not just about one governor of the Federal Reserve. It's about political control of the American central bank and, by extension, a gamble with the global economy. A gamble that could cost a lot more than any tariff or trade war. In Washington, presidents come and go, wars flare up and fade, but one thing never changes. The United States spends more on defense than anyone else. And who builds the arsenal? It's private companies. But Donald Trump does not like this arrangement. So in his second term as US president, he is rewriting the script. He wants a stake in US defense firms, the likes of Lockheed Martin, Boeing, and Palantir. The Trump administration wants a stake in them. Says who? The US Commerce Secretary. He's their version of the Commerce Minister. His name is Howard Lutnick. He said that the government is thinking about this. Although the deals are far from being finalized, the idea is not, it does not seem far-fetched anymore. Because here's what happened last week. The US government took a 10% stake in Intel, the chip maker. We told you about it, 10% in Intel. And earlier this week, Trump floated the idea of owning the land in a South Korean base. So what is the game plan here? What is the Trump administration trying to do? First, let's understand their logic. Why do they want a stake in defense firms? Take Lockheed Martin, for instance. This company gets 97% of its revenue from Washington, from the US government, 97%. With that kind of dependence, can you still call it a private company? Howard Lutnick says you cannot. He called Lockheed Martin an arm of the US government. And this is not an isolated case. For most of these firms, these defense firms, their lifeline is contracts from the Pentagon. That's the US Defense Ministry. From fighter jets to missile systems, these companies sell everything to the US government. In fact, let me show you figures from 2020 to 2024. In this 4-year period, the top 5 defense contractors in America got $771 billion from the Pentagon. $771 billion in 4 years. Lockheed Martin got $313 billion. RTX got $145 billion. Boeing got $115 billion. General Dynamics $116 billion. And Northrop Grumman $81 billion. So the Trump team is asking, why not take the next step? Why not own a piece of the pie you're already baking? Which brings us to question number 2. What exactly is the plan? This is not about rescuing failing companies. This is about profit, leverage, and control. The Trump administration's line is quite straightforward. If taxpayers are effectively the customers, why shouldn't they also be shareholders? By putting government money directly into these companies, Washington gains not just weapons, but also dividends, voting rights, and influence. Basically, if you're using our money, give us a return. That's the idea. Then we come to the question of precedent, meaning, has it been done before? The answer is yes, but only in emergencies. For example, in World War II, Washington commandeered factories. In 2008, it bailed out banks and car makers with equity stakes. But today, in 2025, defense contractors are thriving. Their stocks are soaring. There is no collapse to fix, and there is no declared war to justify it. Like I said, this is not a rescue mission. This is about ambition. Trump is using an old wartime trick, but in peacetime. And that is what makes it appear so radical. Question number 4. What's in it for the White House? What do they hope to achieve? If Washington owns a part of Boeing or Palantir, it gets a direct seat at the table. Think about weapons. If Ukraine or Taiwan suddenly need more, the Pentagon would not just be the buyer, it would be a co-owner of the supplier. And that is serious leverage, although as a government, they already have a lot of leverage over defense companies, and contracts cannot happen without a nod from the government. Nonetheless, it's a way of making sure that corporate decisions align with White House priorities. That said, there are obviously some risks too. If the Pentagon is both buying weapons and profiting from the company that makes those weapons, how tough will it be on cost overruns? Who holds Lockheed Martin accountable? Because this could put company profits ahead of national strategy. It's like the watchdog wagging its tail. For years, the US defense industry has always been a strange hybrid: private corporations, public funding, national stakes. The relationship has always existed. Trump's latest move is only making it brazenly explicit. And this marks a shift in America. It raises the very question of what it means to run a free market in a country where the biggest customer, and maybe soon the biggest shareholder, is the Pentagon itself. Our next story is about Venezuela, a country in South America that makes news once in a while, usually with words like oil, crisis, and Maduro. That's the Venezuelan president, Nicolas Maduro. This is a country of 28 million people, and right now it finds itself at the center of a showdown with the United States of America. As we speak, US warships are sailing close to the Venezuelan coast. But what triggered this face-off? And what does it mean for Venezuela? Tonight we'll break it down, starting with the basics. This is where Venezuela is located, on the northern coast of South America. For most of the 20th century, it was known primarily for one thing, and that is oil. In fact, Venezuela sits on more proven oil reserves than Saudi Arabia. So initially, it was deeply tied to US energy needs. But then politics got in the way. In the early 2000s, Venezuela became a thorn in Washington's side. Then, in 2013, Nicolas Maduro came to power. The US accused him of authoritarianism, sham elections, and gross human rights abuses. In response, Maduro accused the US of imperialism. So they've been at loggerheads for years. And every once in a while, tensions flare. Right now, the US has dispatched a squadron of warships, including an amphibious group, a guided missile cruiser, and even a nuclear-powered submarine. They're all heading towards Venezuelan waters. Officially, the US says this is about combating drug cartels, those that move cocaine and other narcotics across the Caribbean into North America. The US says they are the target, But Venezuela is not buying that explanation. President Nicolas Maduro's government has sent its own warships and drones. They're patrolling the coastline. They're warning that America's show of force is actually about intimidation, maybe even regime change.
The cause we defend is too great. So regime change is not only illegal, but also immoral. And here they will not succeed in colonizing or enslaving Venezuela, South America, or our America. And if one day they touch Venezuela, all of America will rise up for us, for the people of Bolivar.
So why is the US pointing fingers at Maduro? You see, for years, American officials have accused Maduro and his inner circle of being directly involved in drug trafficking. Washington calls it the cartel, the lost souls, the cartel of the sons. Now, this is supposed to be a military-linked network that profits from smuggling cocaine. The Trump administration just doubled down on that cartel. It increased the bounty on Maduro's head to $50 million. This is for prosecution on drug charges. And Maduro's right-hand man, Diosdado Cabello, has a $25 million tag on him. Maduro, unsurprisingly, has called it all a lie. He insists that Venezuela does not even grow coca plants. That's what cocaine is made from. And he has vowed to fight back.
We will have an important deployment of drones with different missions, citizens' attention checkpoints, checkpoints for explorations and surveillance, Navy infantry patrolling through rivers, especially in the Catatumbo River that flows into the Gulf of Venezuela. We'll have Navy patrols in Maracaibo Lake, Navy patrols in the Gulf of Venezuela, and ships of a larger draft up north in our territorial waters.
And there's a bigger fear here. For Caracas, this feels like history repeating itself. The US has a long record of intervening in Latin America, sometimes directly, sometimes through covert operations. Maduro's government argues that the real goal is not to bust cartels, but to destabilize and topple the regime. And it's not an outlandish fear. Washington has already tried what they call the maximum pressure approach in recent years. There have been sanctions, oil embargoes, and recognition of an opposition leader, Juan Guaido. None of it has worked. Maduro is still in power, and now US warships are at his doorstep. So what does Washington really want? Is this really about cocaine, about fentanyl in US cities, or is it about squeezing Maduro into a corner? Most experts say the US does not want a war in Venezuela. A full-scale invasion would be messy and costly. It will also be deeply unpopular in Latin America. What Washington does want is leverage, something to push Maduro towards negotiations or concessions. What makes the current standoff especially dramatic is the military hardware involved. Nuclear submarines in the Caribbean are not an everyday sight. Venezuela has already written to the United Nations. It calls this a serious threat to regional peace and security. So even if this is posturing, the imagery is powerful and dangerous. We'll be tracking this one closely.
This is News 18 Network. India's largest news network.
Speaking of United States and Donald Trump, has the US president wavered from his America First agenda? Some of his MAGA base definitely feel so, because the US president has now defended a proposal to grant student visas to 600,000 Chinese nationals as part of ongoing trade talks with Beijing. So what's behind this pivot? I delve deeper. President Donald Trump is a mercurial man, that's no secret. But his latest U-turn has left even his most loyal supporters baffled. The US president has announced that 600,000 Chinese students will be permitted to study at American colleges. Donald Trump claimed his decision was important to maintain ties between the two countries. Chinese students will help keep many US colleges financially afloat, he said. In fact, China hopes that the United States will act on Trump's commitment to welcome Chinese students and urge the administration to stop harassment and interrogation of Chinese students.
We're getting along very well with China, and I'm getting along very well with President Xi. I think it's very insulting to say your students can't come here, because they'll go out and they'll start building schools and they'll be able to survive it. But I like that their students come here. I like that other countries' students come here. And you know what would happen if they didn't? Our college system would go to hell very quickly. You'd have, and it wouldn't be the top colleges. It would be colleges that struggle on the bottom. And you take out 300,000 or 600,000 students out of the system. I like having, and I told this to President Xi, that we're honored to have their students here.
But this announcement comes at a time when the Trump administration is cracking down on illegal immigration. His base, especially hardline MAGA supporters, push back strongly. Many saw this move as a betrayal of his America First agenda. Some said Americans were tired of decades and decades of this treason. Conservative figures, including Marjorie Taylor Greene and former advisor Steve Bannon, sharply criticized the plan, arguing that guaranteeing 600,000 visas could undermine national security and intellectual property protections. The latest stance of the US president.
Now let's talk about India. Heavy floods are wreaking havoc in northern India. At least 36 people have died so far. Jammu and Kashmir has suffered a deadly landslide along the Vaishno Devi route. It's one of the most visited and revered Hindu pilgrimage sites in India. Himachal Pradesh has lost a major section of a Leh highway. In Punjab, 7 districts are submerged. The capital, New Delhi, is also under stress. Water levels in the river Yamuna here have crossed the danger mark, while Rajasthan has been hit by flash floods. Our next report tells you more.
Heavy rains have unleashed havoc across northern India. Over the last 24 hours, at least 36 people have died. The worst tragedy came in Jammu and Kashmir. A landslide on the Vaishno Devi pilgrim route killed more than 30 devotees. The slide hit trekkers halfway along the 12-kilometer route from Katra to the shrine. The impact of the rains has been devastating. In Jammu's Dora district, 3 more people were swept away by floodwaters. In Punjab, a school with 200 children was engulfed. All had to be rescued. In Jammu, parts of the Madhopur barrage on the Tavi River collapsed, taking vehicles with it. Highways linking Jammu to the rest of India have been damaged. Communication lines are down. The Chief Minister described telecom services as almost non-existent. The scale of rainfall has been extraordinary. Jammu region has recorded over 600 millimeters of rain since August 23. That is more than 700% above normal. Meteorologists say it is the highest rainfall since 1950. And the forecast warns of more rain and thunderstorms. Himachal Pradesh too has seen infrastructure collapse under the force of nature. A major portion of the Manali-Leh National Highway was swept away by the overflowing Beas River, cutting off critical connectivity. Punjab is also struggling with 7 districts submerged as the Beas, Satluj and Ghaggar rivers overflow, forcing large-scale evacuations. In the national capital, the Yamuna has breached the danger mark, inundating low-lying areas. Rajasthan witnessed flash floods earlier this week, while Mumbai and other parts of Maharashtra battled relentless rains just days ago. In Punjab, rivers remain in spate. Levels in major dams, Bhakra, Pong, Ranjit Sagar and Shahpur Kandi, have surged close to their limits. The Bias, Satluj, and Ravi are all flowing above danger mark. Low-lying villages in Fazilka and Firozpur have been evacuated. One image captured the impact beyond India's borders. The historic Gurudwara Darbar Sahib at Kartarpur, linked by the Kartarpur corridor, was partially submerged. Floodwaters from the Ravi River inundated the complex. Reports said around 10 feet of water covered the premises. The corridor, built as a bridge of faith between communities, is now flooded. Relief efforts are underway. The immediate priority is restoring electricity, water supply, and mobile services. Rescue teams have been working non-stop. Thousands have been evacuated from villages. But with more rain forecast, authorities remain on high alert. India is facing one of its worst monsoon disasters in decades. The scale of damage is still being counted, but the message is clear. Extreme weather is becoming the new normal, and India's infrastructure and communities are on the front line.
For our next story tonight, let's shift our attention to Japan. Their government has been in damage control mode for days now. And finally, they have made a strange proclamation. They want everyone to know that no, they will not be giving away a Japanese city to Tanzania. Yes, the country in East Africa. Now, to understand what's going on here, let's look at the bigger picture. The continent of Africa, it is vast, it is home to a young, fast-growing population, and it has huge mineral wealth, vast deposits of natural resources from gold and diamonds to cobalt and uranium. So competition has been growing. Countries are fighting for influence in Africa, from former colonial powers like France, Belgium and the UK to the US, China and Russia. They've all been in this race, and now another player has entered this crowded space. Japan. They have made a range of moves in recent weeks. Most of them are grand promises, like loans of more than $5 billion, trainings for digital transformation, and an economic zone. This is what the Japanese Prime Minister, Shigeru Ishiba, has proposed. He wants to connect the Indian Ocean to Africa and spur investment in the continent. But that's not all. Last week, Japan also hosted a summit, an Africa summit called the Tokyo International Conference on African Development, or TICAD. It was a 3-day conference on African development, and it hosted leaders from about 50 African countries.
We, the people of Japan, wish to laugh, cry, and break a sweat alongside the people of Africa.
And Japan indeed did break a sweat soon after the summit. Everything was going fine, but then Tokyo made an announcement, and the overdrive quickly became overkill. Japan introduced a program, a cultural exchange initiative. They selected 4 Japanese cities, which will foster ties with 4 African countries: Mozambique, Nigeria, Ghana, and Tanzania. There will be exchange events. African volunteers will visit the 4 Japanese cities, or what the government calls hometowns for the partner countries. Now, they meant symbolic hometowns, but people did not really catch that nuance. Soon, misinformation spread. Local African media was over the moon. They published reports saying a Japanese city will now be part of Tanzania. The Nigerian government also added fuel to the fire. They said that Japan will create a special visa for young Nigerians. And the backlash was swift. You see, Japan has traditionally been strict on immigration. Plus, ethnically and even culturally, the society is largely homogeneous. So these statements led to furor, especially on social media. Most comments were blatantly racist. People worried about a flood of immigrants, about the possible lack of safety or the burden on their resources. Japanese city offices received a wave of angry calls and mails. They got thousands of complaints, so now the central government has stepped in. Tokyo has called the claims baseless. It has reassured the public, saying that there are no plans to promote immigration or to issue any kind of special visas. African outlets have also taken down their reports, and the Nigerian government has removed its announcement. But the damage has been done. In recent months, Japan has seen a surge in anti-foreigner sentiment. There are fears about job losses amid other growing problems like stagnant wages, high inflation, and a high cost of living. This has left Prime Minister Ishiba on shaky ground. Japan held its parliamentary elections recently. Ishiba's ruling coalition suffered a bruising defeat in the upper house. He has vowed to remain in office, but his leadership has repeatedly come under doubt. And in this backdrop, he has tried to expand his global outreach by partnering with African countries. But it seems to have backfired. What was meant to build closer ties has exposed deep fault lines, and what was meant to forge links has not only further distanced Ishiba from the public, but also put his Africa ambitions in jeopardy. Walk into almost any shop or restaurant in India today and you'll probably hear the same question. Can you please share your phone number for billing? It used to be a harmless ask, but with time it has become part of system requirements or e-bills. But now that's set to change. Shops will no longer be allowed to demand your number, all thanks to the new DPDP rules, that's Digital Personal Data Protection Rules. And while this may seem like a small move, but for India's privacy laws, it's a big jump. Our next report tells you why.
Most of us gave our mobile numbers away without a second thought. At shops, at restaurants, at retail stores. Retailers used mobile numbers as a universal identifier to link you with loyalty schemes, send SMS receipts, or track your shopping patterns. But behind the counter, those millions of numbers often ended up in giant databases. Sometimes sold, sometimes shared, almost always reused in ways you never agreed to. That's where India's new digital personal data protection rules come in. The DPDP Act 2023, now being operationalized in 2025, is drawing a hard line. Retailers can only collect your number if you explicitly agree, and only for a clearly stated purpose. They must delete it after a set period, 3 years at most, or sooner if you withdraw consent. No more implied consent or vague promises. And there's another thing. Shops cannot refuse to sell you something if you don't give your number. Stores can no longer say, "Sorry, we need your number for billing." If you don't want to share, they must provide alternatives. Like a printed receipt, an email, or another privacy-friendly option. In other words, your right to shop is no longer hostage to your phone number. So, what happens to loyalty programs? This is where disruption comes in. Many loyalty schemes are built around mobile numbers. It's the glue that holds your discounts, offers, and points together. Now, retailers will need to get creative. Perhaps loyalty cards, app-based logins, or keypad self-entry systems that don't force you to shout your number across a crowded billing line. So, what about all the numbers already collected? That's the part retailers aren't talking about loudly. Under the new rules, they'll need to set expiry clocks on those databases. If you haven't shopped with them in 3 years, they must delete your details. And if you opt out, they must delete them right away. This could shrink some of the massive customer data pools that retail giants rely on. For India's privacy laws, this is a very big deal. For years, mobile numbers have been the skeleton key of India's digital economy. They are linked to Aadhaar, bank accounts, UPI, SIM cards. Losing control of it meant opening yourself to spam, fraud, and worse. By forcing shops to stop casually collecting and hoarding them, the law plugs one of the leakiest holes in the system. And it will affect everything. Housing societies, visitor entry systems, and even small gyms that jot down your number will now fall under the same framework. They'll have to explain why they're collecting it, for how long, and delete it when the purpose ends. No more scribbled visitor books that never go away. For the world, this isn't new. Europe has the General Data Protection Regulation. California has the California Consumer Privacy Act. Same laws, different names. India's DPDP is the country's attempt to join that club, signaling that personal data is no longer fair game for businesses. It's also about building trust, making people feel safe in a digital economy. For too long, privacy was seen as the price of participation in modern life. The new rules flip that, suggesting that convenience can no longer come at the cost of your consent.
16-year-old Adam Rain lived in California. He loved basketball, video games and dogs. Rain's friends saw him as a funny teen. He cracked jokes and disrupted classes to get a few laughs. But he was also going through a rough patch. He was diagnosed with an irritable bowel syndrome. So he switched to an online program in school. Around November last year, he started using ChatGPT. At first for schoolwork, but then he started discussing plans to end his life. Gradually, he became withdrawn. In January this year, he signed up for a paid ChatGPT account. He talked about seeing no meaning in life. So ChatGPT responded with empathy, trying to encourage him. Then Rain went a step further. He started looking up suicide methods, and ChatGPT supplied them. At some point, the bot detected mental distress, so it listed emergency helpline numbers. But the teen bypassed these safeguards. He said he was only researching. And then in April, he killed himself. No note, no warning. His friends and family could not believe it. So his father turned to Rain's smartphone seeking answers. First, he went through his son's text messages, then his social media apps, but he got no clues. Then he sifted through the ChatGPT logs and he was shocked. His teenage son had been discussing ending his life with ChatGPT for months. So now Adam Rain's parents have sued OpenAI, that's the parent company of ChatGPT. The parents say that the chatbot encouraged their son to take his life. This is the first legal action accusing OpenAI of wrongful death, but not the first case of its kind. Last year, a teenager in Florida killed himself, and his mother sued a popular chatbot called Character AI, blaming it for her son's death. The year before that, a Belgian man ended his life. He had confided in an AI chatbot before his death. According to his widow, the bot encouraged him to do so. Unfortunately, such cases are becoming increasingly common. AI is developing at lightning speed. Now there are thousands of chatbots. They can type, talk, hear. They have personalities, faces, backstories, and millions of users. ChatGPT alone is used by 700 million people every week. 700 million. AI bots are a near $8 billion global market, but as they explode, their purpose is shifting. Initially, they were seen as a repository of knowledge, like a new age Google search. You can ask them almost anything, and within seconds, you have the answer. But now people are increasingly using AI bots to form emotional connections, as friendly companions, as romantic partners, even as AI therapists. But as people get attached to artificial intelligence, research is playing catch-up about what comes next. Its findings are mixed. Some surveys show benefits, with people saying that they no longer have suicidal thoughts after talking to chatbots regularly. But some studies disagree. This one was conducted by OpenAI and MIT. It found that the higher the chatbot use, the more the loneliness. Other reports talk about people having delusional conversations with chatbots, episodes of AI-fueled mania, and conversations about suicide and violence. And what about safety? Where are the guardrails? Who is held accountable in a case like this? Yes, some safety mechanisms are built into the technology, but they're not enough. They're far from enough. Plus, like I said, research is scrambling to keep up. So the risks and limits are not clear, and regulation is falling behind. It's what you call the perfect storm. And it has led users, us humans, into a cruel global psychological experiment. Our last story tonight is from Botswana. This is a landlocked country in southern Africa. It is home to about 2.5 million people. It is rich in diamonds. Botswana is one of the world's leading diamond producers, but lately the market has been rocky and Botswana's economy has suffered. So has their healthcare system. There are not enough medicines or vital equipment. The medical supply chain has collapsed, so now Botswana has declared a public health emergency. It has set out a multi-million-dollar plan to rectify things. But will the plan work? Also, how did they get to this? How did the situation get so bad? Our next report tells you.
Elective surgeries postponed. Prices of medicines inflated 5 to 10 times. Shortage of dressings and sutures. Shortage of medicines for illnesses, from hypertension and diabetes to mental health and cancer. and a medical debt of $75 million. This is the state of affairs in Botswana, the landlocked southern African country. So this week, President Duma Boko addressed the nation. He declared a public health emergency. He says that the country faces a shortage of essential medicines and medical equipment due to a collapsed supply chain. The Ministry of Health says that the system is severely strained. But how did it get to this? The first reason is diamonds. Botswana is one of the world's largest diamond producers. The country's economy depends on its vast diamond reserves, which make up about 80% of the country's foreign earnings. But the global diamond market has been undergoing a slump. Sales have weakened in recent years. This has depleted government coffers, shrunk the national budget, and pushed the cash-strapped government to suspend crucial ministerial purchases. But this is not all. The US funded a third of Botswana's HIV response and provided $12 million to fight malaria and tuberculosis. That is, before Donald Trump returned to power earlier this year. Since then, the US has made sweeping cuts in aid to African countries, including Botswana, where the steep cuts have increased healthcare challenges and further strained Gaborone's economic troubles. But the government remains undeterred. After all, the president is not surprised. The 55-year-old Harvard-trained lawyer made history last year, when his umbrella for democratic change won a landslide in elections, ousting a party that had governed Botswana for about 6 years. Before taking office, he promised to fix the economy, which is too reliant on diamonds. And now, he has set out to do just that. He has announced a multi-million-dollar plan to rectify the supply chain. The Finance Ministry has approved an $18 million emergency plan. This will include funding for emergency medicines, the distribution of which would be overseen by the military. As part of the efforts, military trucks will leave the capital with supplies and arrive in remote areas. It is aimed at reaching for the low-hanging fruit to help those in immediate need. But the problems are far from over. Boko's plan may be able to pull Botswana's healthcare out of turmoil in the short term. But can they bring long-term benefits while the larger problems persist? After all, US healthcare aid cuts are not going anywhere, and there is no end in sight for the 3-year downturn in the price of diamonds, which accounts for about a quarter of Botswana's GDP. President Boko may have promised to fix the economy, but as crisis mounts and the healthcare system crumbles, he is on the clock. Will he succeed? It is hard to know, but one thing is clear. He is not ready to swallow the bitter pill, at least just yet.
This is News 18 Network. India's largest news network.
Speaking of United States and Donald Trump, has the US president wavered from his America First agenda? Some of his MAGA base definitely feels so, because the US president has now defended a proposal to grant student visas to 600,000 Chinese nationals as part of ongoing trade talks with Beijing. So what's behind this pivot? I delve deeper. President Donald Trump is a mercurial man, that's no secret. But his latest U-turn has left even his most loyal supporters baffled. The US president has announced that 600,000 Chinese students will be permitted to study at American colleges. Donald Trump claimed his decision was important to maintain ties between the two countries. Chinese students will help keep many US colleges financially afloat, he said. In fact, China hopes that the United States will act on Trump's commitment to welcome Chinese students and urge the administration to stop harassment and interrogation of Chinese students.
We're getting along very well with China, and I'm getting along very well with President Xi. I think it's very insulting to say students can't come here because they'll go out and they'll start building schools and they'll be able to survive it. But I like that their students come here. I like that other countries' students come here. And you know what would happen if they didn't? Our college system would go to hell very quickly. You'd have, and it wouldn't be the top colleges. It would be colleges that struggle on the bottom. And you take out 300,000 or 600,000 students out of the system. I like having, and I told this to President Xi, that we're honored to have their students here.
But this announcement comes at a time when the Trump administration is cracking down on illegal immigration. His base, especially hardline MAGA supporters, push back strongly. Many saw this move as a betrayal of his America First agenda. Some said Americans were tired of decades and decades of this treason. Conservative figures, including Marjorie Taylor Greene and former advisor Steve Bannon, sharply criticized the plan, arguing that guaranteeing 600,000 visas could undermine national security and intellectual property protections. The latest stance of the US president is also a stark contrast to what the Trump administration had said 3 months ago. In May 2025 visa policy change statement, Secretary of State Marco Rubio had said, the US State Department will work with the Department of Homeland Security to aggressively revoke visas for Chinese students. The statement read, and I quote, "We will also revise visa criteria to enhance scrutiny of all future visa applications from People's Republic of China." So then what changed? For one, the ongoing trade negotiations with China. By treating visas for students as a gesture of goodwill, Donald Trump aimed to
And now it's time for Vantage shots, images that tell the story. SpaceX deploys its first mock Starlink satellites after a series of failures. In Georgia, archaeologists unearth a 1.8 million-year-old human jawbone. In the US, a 99-year-old is airlifted from a cruise ship. And finally, we're taking you back in history. On this day in 1955, the Guinness Book of World Records made its debut. It was published for the first time in London. This marked the beginning of a global phenomenon in documenting human achievement. We're leaving you on that note. Thank you for watching. We'll see you tomorrow.
There's our flip. There's a buoy. This is good. Right.
Hello and welcome to the late night edition with me, Ayushman Singh Jamwala. Top story: US Secretary tariffs on Indian goods A steep 25% penalty over Russian oil imports kicked in from today, taking the total tariff burden now to 50%. The impact could be severe, as 55% of India's $87 billion merchandise exports to the US are now at risk. India is the only country penalized for importing Russian oil, while China and Europe continue similar trade without facing the tariff storm. On the other hand, Prime Minister Modi has doubled down on the Make in India mission, spotlighting rare earth minerals and domestic manufacturing. The government has already made it clear that India will protect its national interests above all, and nothing will happen when it comes